Thank you so much for your patience and welcome to the kickoff of the Canadian Design Build Institute's virtual conference. My name is Julie DeVries and I'm the executive staff to CDBI. We are ecstatic that you all are joining us today from all over Canada and beyond. Anyone is able to chat with me if you see me online in the lobby or by sending an email if you have any questions about CDBI, how to become a member, what we offer, and how you can get involved. My email address is posted on the CDBI website for any inquiries. Before we get started with introducing the speakers, I will bring on CDBI's chair onto the screen. Gary Bale has been a part of CDBI's council for many years and provides a unique set of executive management skills developed over his 40-year career in both public and private sector, heavy civil construction and engineering. Gary is the principal of Bale Project Consulting, specializing in providing executive advisory and strategic project procurement services for the delivery and execution of major infrastructure projects in Canada. Everyone, please welcome with me CDBI's chair, Gary Bale.
Welcome everyone to the Canadian Design Build Institute 2020 conference, including over 100 delegates across Canada, speakers from Canada and the United States, moderators and special guests. Now I realize that we've already had some minor glitches in being able to get the conference going live. I also understand that CCA staff have sent out a text message indicating that we would start at 20 minutes after the hour. So hopefully those that are online now we will move forward. And for those that are coming in at the 20-minute mark, apologies that you've missed the beginning sessions, the beginning opening remarks. We have an exciting conference program for you over the course of today and next week. As you've heard, my name is Gary Bale. I'm a transportation construction consultant and the chair of CDBI for the past 2 years. It is with great pleasure that with the assistance of the CDBI council members and the CCA staff, we're able to continue to bring you a conference this year in the midst of a pandemic across Canada and the world. Thanks to all the delegates for attending our first virtual, online, and as you now know, live event. While we realized earlier in the year that our annual in-person conference may pose travel and company policy constraints, we immediately began looking for ways that we could best recreate the experience virtually, delivering not only the educational content, but also a way for us to network with each other. I'm sure that with the new format of 6 sessions spanning over 3 days, and the opportunity to connect with your fellow delegates, the speakers, the CDBI committee members, and our sponsors through our virtual platform, you will end up with many great takeaways to help you reach new heights on your design build projects. Although we were not anticipating any technical issues, we've already realized that we've had an auto message that went out earlier in the day, and we had temporary connection problems at the beginning of this session. But if we have further interruptions, the moderator will continue until the speaker is able to return, or alternatively, please check your email that you registered with, as this is how we will contact you. As many of you know, CDBI's goals are to educate the industry, recommend and support design build practices, promote the use of design build methods and project delivery where it's suitable. And we provide a forum for receiving and exchanging information regarding design build. For those of you that are attending the virtual event who are not CDBI members, please take a look at our website. And as Julia identified, please contact her and we'd be pleased to provide you additional information. We would like to thank Brownlee Law, Barristers and Solicitors, and Pormelo Construction Services for sponsoring the 2020 conference and helping to make today's sessions and the conference possible. On the left-hand side of your screen, you should see the sponsors exhibit hall, where you can find more information and chat with representatives from both our sponsors and the Design Build Institute of America. For those of you working towards a Gold Seal certification, we'll be offering 1 credit to those who are attending all 6 sessions of the conference. In order to earn the credit, please complete the pop-up survey that you will see in each of the conference sessions. A certificate will be sent to you after the conference. Now, today, the conference is broken into 2 sessions. The Future of Design Build, Progressive Design Build, and we're delighted to open with a keynote presentation from the chair-elect of the Design Build Institute of America. After a short break, the second session is focused on progressive design build in Canada, followed with a unique question and answer period with both the moderator, Jeff, and Bruce. So there'll be lots of opportunities, even in the shorter version of our anticipated program today. At the end of the 2 sessions, I'll deliver a short 10-minute update on the current 2020 CDBI committee structure and activities. CDBI is also pleased to receive 4 project submissions from design build companies for the coveted annual CDBI Award of Excellence. The winner of the 2020 Award of Excellence will be announced on day 3 in the chair's opening remarks. As we often see in contracts and here on projects, time is of the essence, and we have a very interesting day that warrants immediate attention, and we're going to move on with that without further delay. I will now introduce today's moderator, Paul Stocko. Paul is a partner with Brown Lee and a law firm with locations in Edmonton and Calgary. His focus is on construction litigation and procurement, representing owners, general contractors, and subcontractors at all levels of court in Alberta and Ontario. Paul is a CDBI council member and a member of various construction industry organizations. He writes and lectures widely on all aspects of construction and procurement law. Paul, welcome to opening up session number 1. And everyone, all the delegates, enjoy your day 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary, and good morning or good afternoon to all of you who are online. As Gary said, I'm Paul Stocko. I hail from Edmonton, Alberta, where it's cloudy and minus 15 degrees Celsius. And for our American friends, that's probably about minus 5 Fahrenheit. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our kickoff and our keynote speaker, Jeff Neumeyer. And as I walk through his bio, I'm going to ask Jeff to turn his microphone on so that he can address you with his presentation. Just a little bit of background about Jeff. Jeff is the Chief Development Officer for the San Francisco International Airport Planning, Design, and Construction Division. And he oversees the planning, design, and construction sections. Jeff is a graduate of Cal Poly with a degree in architectural engineering and has over 34 years of experience in design and construction. In his current role as the airport's Chief Development Officer, Jeff is currently responsible for the airport's $7.3 billion US modernization that involves a significant amount of change and development and upgrading to the existing infrastructure, and as well as new infrastructure. As you'll hear in Jeff's comments today about progressive design build, Jeff is a very strong proponent and advocate of the team concept, which is really fundamental to design build. And he employs that team concept in the design and construction of public infrastructure projects. He's also a proponent of the use of progressive design build as an implementation approach for integrated project delivery. Jeff is currently serving as a member of the Dean's Council for Cal Poly San Luis Obispo College of Architecture and Environmental Design. He also serves as chair for the Airports Council International Project and Construction Delivery Group. He's a member of the Airports Council International Operations and Technical Committee, serves as a member on the International Partnering Institute Board of Directors. is a member of the Design Build Institute of America's National Board of Directors and is the chair for the Design Build Institute of America's Progressive Design Build Committee. So I think with that background and with those credentials, I think Jeff is ideally suited to be speaking to us today about progressive design build in the US. Thank you all for listening. Jeff, take it away.
Oh, thank you so much, Paul. And I'm so honored to be here. This is really, truly exciting to kind of share a lot of lessons learned over, gosh, I'm coming up on 13 years of progressive design build at San Francisco Airport. And the bad news is we've got a long ways to go and looking at design build in this new tool. But we'll have a lot of fun today to kind of go through maybe potentially could be a different way of looking at design build. So with that, I thought I'd start off with a little bit of just some projects we've completed at San Francisco before we dive into the lessons learned along the way of progressive design build here in the United States and how it's kind of come about. A quick picture of it. This is our third progressive design build project that we completed almost 10 years ago. This was an air traffic control tower that we built on behalf of our FAA here. They gave us the money and we built this, and it was the first time a federal government agency had ever granted money to an airport to build a progressive design build. This tower was an incredibly beautiful tower. You're looking at a view from a place where all passengers at the airport on a non-secure site can actually come up and touch the air traffic control tower. We just recently completed the second phase of 3 phases of a brand new $2.4 billion terminal complex that we are building. A few more pictures of the inside. This will be the first LEED Platinum terminal building in the United States, a single terminal building being receiving that, and we're well on our way to achieving that status here in this particular building. It also became the first terminal building in the airport in the United States to win a Fitwel Award for a healthy building as well. And lastly, here is another project that we've recently completed, which is a Grand Hyatt hotel as well as an air train station that we completed at the airport and was just recently rated as the 4th best airport hotel in the world and the top airport hotel in North America. And some other pictures of that. The result of all these projects, really, we couldn't have done all of these projects, and there's many more that are going on in our $7.3 billion capital program, that we couldn't have actually done all this in the last 5 years if it wasn't for progressive design build. And so we've become rather addicted to it and really use it as our go-to project delivery methodology. So a few more shots of inside the hotel. So, now we get away from the day job and into the other day job that we take on, which is how to make our industry here in the United States a lot better. And I spent a lot of time trying to explain to my commission, as well as Think Handy in San Francisco, and the powers to be that I reported to, was why fix anything in the way we deliver projects. And so I thought that'd be a good place to get started. And what I'm showing here is this comes out of a report done by McKinsey Global Institute called Reinventing Construction. And I think it's important before we change anything to understand why are we doing what we're doing. And what this chart really shows is that going up the vertical side, that's really the amount of dollars that are put in per place by the trades in the field. Going to along the horizontal axis is the percentage of production, labor production, that we're seeing year to year. And what is kind of, I guess, embarrassing if you look at is there's the United States sitting as one of the declining leaders in this business. And this is a snapshot in 2016 when this study was done. Nothing to be super proud of, but there is something here to be broken in the United States. And so this has kind of led to not only design build, but progressive design build and talking about a new way of doing business. It is interesting to note that Canada, what's going on, you have to be doing something incredibly right up there because you're definitely in the outperformer, really pulling along and doing great. But I wish I could say the same thing down here. We are not doing very good. What's interesting is you can see China is down there in the lower part as an accelerator, but they're very low on the dollars in place. And the only reason why they're down there is because obviously their labor is a lot cheaper than what we've got here. So their dollars in place are going to be significantly less. So the real point of this is whether or not we're increasing that productivity in the field or not. And so I will describe why I believe and why the Design Build Institute of America believes we have lost productivity and created so many issues in the cost of construction. Just to prove the case that this was a study that was done by Stanford through their SciFi program and collected the data behind this. And this is a graph of productivity in the United States of all industries minus construction. And it has grown significantly, almost 250% since 1964. This is construction. We have just fallen off the face of the earth and have had no increased productivity. It's interesting to note here that our actual workers more productive than ever, meaning, you know, a lot of people say, well, this is because of safety requirements, environmental requirements, all these types of things, but the actual worker itself, when they know what to do, is actually more productive than ever. So why are we continuing to slip in this productivity? And it really is because the stakeholders, which are at the front end of who we serve, trying to deliver a project to, that vision that the stakeholders have, getting to the trap trades, the trades that actually do the work, it's broken. It's that information gets so diluted down. And as I mentioned, if the trade crafts are so good at what they do and they're slipping and the stakeholders are still good at telling us what they need, that means it's broken in between. And so that's where we start off with design build and how we can fix that gap. And so the idea of progressive design build and virtual design and construction was to try to bridge that gap and try to identify those and try to resolve those issues of why that might occur. Before I kind of get started, you know, and this has been an interesting last 5 years with progressive design build within the Design Build Institute of America, is that progressive design build's intent is not to change design build done right from our perspective. It's just another tool, another way that's highly scalable still to implement design build done right. And I'm similar to probably all your practices that there's these guidelines that if we do design build done right, you increase the probability, but also if you do design build done wrong, you can really create a mess on your projects. And so this is our document of our organization to try to explain the universally applicable way of doing design build across all. And then to back that up, we have a progressive design build document that is just that separate tool that talks about this, this new tool that we're using within design build. The basic understanding of progressive design build is that it uses, for the most part, a qualification-based design to select the design builder. There is some cost components if you so choose, but it's not required. It's followed by a process whereby the owner then progresses towards a design contract, a design and build contract with the design builder, meaning that you figure it all out as you go and then finalize the commercial terms of the contract into what looks like a fixed fee, but it involves a GMP. But the primary objective of progressive design build is not only do you have the right team, but it allows a relationship to occur prior to finalizing those commercial terms of scope, cost, and schedule. It allows us to have a discussion, a professional discussion. And so that's term of progressive doesn't refer to a political movement, but it's really referring to a progression of steps we take through the process. And that's how the term progressive came about. There's a little more history behind how that term got used, but it really is a series of steps once we select the right team and then we go through the design build process. So I'm going to slowly begin to build up the case now for progressive design build. And I'm not here to say that progressive design build in any way is a silver bullet that's going to save the world. It can actually be your worst nightmare as well. But I'm going to make the case of why you might want to. And again, McKinsey Global Institute looked at this at a world level and noted that construction is one of two halves, meaning that we do fairly well on the architecture side, even on the civil side and industrial side referring to things such as, say, petroleum, refineries, those types of things that are more industrial. If we say the base is 100 as in terms of productivity, You can see how building, civil, and industrial do quite well, but these specialized trades is where we really fall down. And it's not a big, those of us that are involved in particularly vertical construction, it's not a big surprise that it's these key trades of mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, curtain wall, fire protection, fire alarm, that begin to help really challenge our jobs. And we don't spend a lot of time. And so I'll talk a little bit about how Progressive Design Build introduces those key trades into the process as part of the relationship up front, and not at the end of design, but at the beginning of design. There are 7 areas that were recommended by the McKinsey Global Institute on how we might fix our industry. And 2 of the first things they start off with is reshape regulation and rewire contracts. And so that the answer to that really was, let's look at Progressive Design Build. And the second part of that really big part of what they did was to infuse technology innovation in what we do. And so that is done kind of under the guise of virtual design and construction, which is actually something that helps support optimization of the Progressive Design Build process. It's interesting about virtual design and construction is that it actually answers the other 4 items we've got about rethinking design, how to improve procurement and supply chain, because now we can talk about prefabrication because we're actually modeling it so that we can have multiple trades fabricating things miles away from our job and bringing it together. It definitely can be utilized for on-site execution so that we can visually see what we're going to build before we actually build it and how it might go. And it also allows us to reskill workers to think about maybe building things in a 3D model before they actually build it. And so we can train people to do that so that we can provide better information to the craft trades that are out in the field and help bridge that gap between what the stakeholders want and what the trades actually have the set of instructions to do. Quickly, this was again done by the McKinsey Global Institute, is that Progressive Design Build all by itself roughly can save 8 to 9% on this productivity issue. But primarily all we do with the contract is we enable better behavior on the project. And that's where the biggest difference gets made. It allows then to have a virtual design construction program where you can actually infuse this technology and have everybody working on the same model at the same time. And here's where you get your first initial big savings on the project, is this infusion that occurs that has been enabled by the Progressive Design Build model. And that's roughly anywhere from 14 to 15% increased productivity. And as I had mentioned before, once we do that, we can really talk about better ways of designing, better ways of procuring, better on-site execution, really infuse those lean construction things that come into play. And the total impact potential of a fully integrated process like this could be anywhere upwards of 48 to 60% savings or increased production on our projects. And so that's kind of a study that was done by McKinsey. So lastly, just a quick little blurb that I picked out of their report. There's 3 points here, is that there is a need to move away from the hostile contract environments that characterizes many construction projects to a system focused on collaboration and problem solving. Hence my passion for creating an environment of collaboration and problem solving, as I truly believe this to be true. The second big point of this is establishing a single source of truth on projects for monitoring progress early, potentially supported by collaborative technology, helps to minimize misalignments and enable joint corrective action. What's interesting is this data already exists to fundamentally improve the accuracy of cost and schedule estimates. And this is the application of virtual design and construction. And the last thing to point out in their recommendations is to move forward towards best practices, appropriate alternative contracting models such as integrated project delivery, and help build long-term collaborative relationships. Relational contracts will need to become more prevalent than transactional contracts. Sufficient investment in upfront planning and incorporating all parties' input have been shown to raise productivity substantially. So with that, that kind of sets the stage of the why we would do anything. So I had showed you how the United States is lagging behind. There is a real reason why that has occurred, and it really boils down to the standard of care that is an applicable law to the quality of the work designers have to do versus the Spearman doctrine, which is an expectation that an owner implies to the bidders or contractors who are bidding on our projects. In the United States, the standard of care is essentially the law that says that the designers have to provide a standard of care that is reasonably exercised by the profession on a particular type of project in a particular place under certain particular conditions. The interesting part about standard of care here in the United States is that usually gets interpreted not during design or construction, but after the project is completed in the court of law. Essentially, the designer is accountable to a reasonable standard of care. Therefore, errors and omission are acceptable within a limit. That limit's not specific enough in the law, but it can be challenged in the court of law. Opposite of that is the Spearman Doctrine, which is a case law that came into play in the United States in 1918. The basic premise is that the owner warrants the information, plans, and specifications which an owner provides to the general contractor are accurate. The owner is liable for the loss and damages which result solely from insufficiencies or defects in such information, plans, and specification. And again, this was a landmark law, appropriate law at the time, because the United States was moving towards the low bid process. Essentially, the builder can assume the contract is error-free with no omissions. They do not have a responsibility in a low bid environment to find the errors that exist. They don't have an obligation to go to the site and investigate everything because it's not a reasonable assumption. And so this conflict that exists between errors and omission that is somewhat allowed to some level on the design side, you get the bid, have a contractor come in and follow up with the assumption that they should have known. That's created a real conflict, this real adversarial relationship, because as owners, and we were guilty of this many years ago even at our airport, is we would always side with the designers and say you should have known. And through time, we began to realize that no, that isn't the obligation of the builder to have should have known. Even if you say it in your contract, it's not enforceable because this law does exist and every contractor in the United States knows that this federal law is applicable. So that kind of set the state to have this kind of, I'm not going to pay for it, you should have known, these all, and really have this development of these contracts in the United States that really started to treat construction, and for that matter, design, as a commodity, not as a relationship and not as a profession. To really break down what we're trying to do in Progressive Design Build is to reinvent the commercial terms, the organization behavior, and the operating management style. And what I mean by that is that with the commercial terms, you're going to get the behavior you contract for. So question yourselves, what is the contract relationship you want? Do you just want the cheapest thing or do you want the best thing? The next thing is the behavior. The project individual team members will behave depend upon the leadership style. So how's the participant control structure organized? And of course, the last part of that is what is the operating management structure going to look like? And the behavior of the team will reflect the way the project is managed. How is the project plan created? And so with each one of these, there's kind of two ways you could do each one of these. On the commercial terms here in the United States, we have treated construction as a transactional commodity where price is emphasized and qualifications are marginalized. Progressive Design Build and Design Build as a whole tries to move towards a relational contract where the terms of cost, scope, and schedule are co-created prior to finalizing the contract and qualifications are emphasized. The organization behavior can be a command and control type, which is kind of what we've done for almost 100 years here in the United States. The organization structure is hierarchical. And typically blame is assigned to the party based on contract requirements. So, you know, you didn't follow the contract off with your head type thing, versus a collaborative environment where you build an alliance built on a common purpose. And I'll talk a little bit about how important common purpose is in Progressive Design Build. And you use a partnered approach to issue identification and resolution. And the idea here is that we try to get to issues before they actually become contractual problems. That if we can get those out of people's head ahead of time, we actually have a chance to resolve them in a friendly environment. And the operating management can be one of mandated requirements. The idea of critical path scheduling, where we establish a schedule before we've ever talked to a contractor, let alone the subcontractors, and say, oh, the schedule can be done in this amount of time. And if you don't, here's the liquidated damages, that kind of mandated requirement. And then fixed price based off of the low bid, where you told us you're going to do it for that much, so get it done, without even really understanding what we have to do. Versus the other style, which would be more co-created, the idea that a schedule is based on a bunch of people who are actually going to do the work, having a discussion first about what really is possible and what is the fastest way to do it, and working out the right price to achieve those goals, and developing the design through a target value budgeting to promote innovation and creativity, to allow us to explore before we fix the price on things, because ultimately we do have to fix the price. Nobody's saying that we have just an unlimited budget on all this, and we have to set those targets, and then we have to work towards those things. So the concept of progressive design build is simply select the best terms using a qualification-based selection as a design builder, integrate as one team to deliver the projects through a stakeholder engagement process. And I'll talk a little bit about that and what that means, and building that team around the stakeholders for the purpose of getting that information accurately to the trades who actually build our projects. And then, just as importantly as everything, is because we've created this relationship, we focus on a team that gets along, that works collaboratively together, with the goal of aligning our expectations, actually making promises to each other, and then putting it in the commercial terms of the legal contract, so that basically the legal contract represents what we all promised each other. We as human beings actually operate really well under promises. What we don't operate on is coerced legal requirements. But if the legal requirements align with the promises, we have a better chance. It's not perfect, but we have a better chance of having the legal contract actually work out and not become the enemy of the project, or a place where we all fall to, but we work in another place towards those promises we made to each other. To get started with it, as we looked at progressive design build, we really rearranged what we think the risk might be. And this really stems from, and I'm just going to let these roll here for all of you to kind of read, but these are what the owner has traditionally thought about the designer and builder, including myself as an owner. In my experience as being a designer, these are things I actually used to think about the builder and the owner as well. And of course, these are the items that a builder then thinks about an owner, or might think about the designer. I myself have never been a builder or a contractor, so I can't validate those things. But there's simple things up here, like the owner thinks that the designer is only going to be concerned with their own ego and always drive things over budget. And they just think the builder is just going to cut corners to try to make a bunch of money and just mutilate us. Designers always think that all a contractor wants to do is just look for errors on the drawing so they can just gouge the owner and make more money. And the designer thinks the owner is never going to pay for any changes they have to make, because we never change any scope. And the builder thinks the owner will never be satisfied with the quality of work and is never going to pay for changes. And of course, the designer thinks that the builder thinks the designer never provides complete drawings, and that the fault is always with the contractor because they just plain miss things in their bid. So you can see all this confusion of thought process that has gone on with various things. And so we've built really good contracts around all this stuff. But I don't believe most of these things are real. And I think most of us, as we look at these things, actually kind of find this kind of laughable, because if we get down to it, none of this is really true. What is true with the risk is that the vision is the responsibility of the owner. We are responsible for communicating what we want, meaning what is the budget expectations? What are the funding expectations? What do we want for a schedule? What do we want for the scope? And we also have the responsibility for sharing that vision with the team. And we own that. And we cannot give that one away under any kind of contracting strategy. I believe that for us as an airport, and I can answer only for that, is that this is probably one of the single biggest mistakes of where we had flawed practices, is we weren't really good at really following up and making sure we had communicated that information to our designers and builders. And so we believe now that that vision is totally on us from the get-go and can never leave us. The second risk is really the design risk. It's the responsibility of a designer to take on that vision and develop it into a set of instructions. And designers are okay with that. That's their business, and they're okay accepting that risk. So let's let that stay with them, and only that part. They're not responsible necessarily for the dreaming. They're responsible for interpreting that vision into a set of instructions. And of course, then there's the actual construction risk, the idea that somebody has to build something within a scope and that was been defined, a price that they provided, and a schedule that they committed to in the contract. And most builders I know they want to do that. They don't want to be involved in design risk, and they don't want to be involved in the dream. They just want to be told exactly what to do, and then they will figure out how to build it, and they're really good at it. And so the idea of progressive design build is that we understand that those risks probably need to stay with their appropriate party, so that the risk should stay with the organization that can best manage that risk, but focus on aligning those expectations, then assigning the best organization to manage that risk appropriately, not just coerce somebody into something, but actually have a discussion and find out what really could get in the way of making that happen. And so managing that risk by aligning those expectations really is about the project team and the project. We break those up into 3 categories. And then we have the kind of the tripod of each one of these, where we have the project team made up of the owner, who's responsible for the division, the designer who's responsible for the design, and the builders who's responsible for the construction. And of course, the project is, as we all know, is the scope, cost, and schedule. And think about our contracts. That is really the biggest part of our contract, is making sure those things are aligned, because it's only when those things don't get aligned and they get out of whack, we end up referring to the contract. And then the project gets into trouble. So why not have this relationship up front, and before we procure all of our trades, have a discussion before we finalize the contract, so we can collaborate in an environment that isn't adversarial, but is one of team, and we can align the vision, the design, and construction in a conversation, not through a series of legal contracts or contract documents, but have a discussion during the development of those things. And then we finalize the price, bring on our trades, where we have promises and commitments made, have a commercial set of terms, and then deliver the project. And so that, in a nutshell, is progressive design build. It's a series of steps. Sounds simple, but it can get very complicated. The basic foundation of progressive design build, and we're starting to kind of build up on this, is really to get that exceptional project team for the particular project. And that includes not only the design team and the build team, but includes the project management team as well. Most of the time that's on the owner, that we have to make sure we've got the right people on that. And this is the first stop where, as owners, I have had to make changes in my own project team, who I had the inappropriate people managing the project. They were bullies, if you will. And this is not a project delivery method where the owner can have a project manager who is going to be that bully, or that person that's going to tell everybody what to do. And so I think that that person, or whoever that project manager from the owner side, is everything in this, because I find that the design team and the design build teams will basically behave the way they're treated. The next big part of it is to use those collaborative systems that I've touched on already. The idea of 3D modeling, an integrated working environment where, if you can on a project, have people working in the same room, subcontractors, even the stakeholders being able to visit close by. If possible, the more you can bring the team together in a single space, the better off you are. Looking at last planner improvement programs of how to make schedules better as you go through and learn more about a project, because most of our projects are one-offs. They're not repeats of things from the past. And so we have to learn as we go. And we work through a target value budgeting as we design the project. The other third leg of this is really focusing on that alliance of our stakeholders, our sub-consultants under the design prime designers, and our subcontractors under the builder. And I'll talk, as I mentioned, about how the engagement of the stakeholders in this process is a way that we might build that relationship around people. The primary objective of progressive design build is to achieve design excellence. My move towards at the airport to push us into progressive design build was built around, I had a director who said, I don't want to just hear you delivered your project on time and on budget, because that's a requirement of your job. I want to know how you can do better than that and actually have exceptional project outcomes. And that was the challenge. Of course, my response was, okay, then we have to come up with a different way of delivering projects. Hence, in the last 13 years, why we've been able to do that. If we have the right team and we have these alliances, we can actually come up with creative and innovative ways of doing things together, because we can now have that conversation. And then we have this opportunity now to virtualize our building model. And when I say building, I don't necessarily mean a building, but it could also be a horizontal structure. It's the art of building, how we're going to build something and make sure that we all have that alignment, not only on 2 dimensions, but it's 3 dimensions, so that we can actually see what the physical building might look like before we actually spend the real money on building it. So It's really important though, in progressive design build is that you start off with these outcomes that are beyond the contract. The reasoning for that is that nobody's silly enough to say that we don't have project budgets and we don't have schedules we have to achieve, but those become contract milestones, but those aren't necessarily motivators of people. The idea of outcomes are what are those things that become really important to not only our stakeholders, but to ourselves. And so setting what those outcomes and having the team co-create what those outcomes might look like is really important, because that's the glue that's going to hold them together to achieve the contract outcomes. In other words, what we're trying to say here is if you have a team that really wants to do a whole bunch of things, that's your best shot at actually getting everything done in the contract. But just because you have it in a contract, it says you shall, doesn't actually really guarantee it'll come to fruition. It's the people that'll make it come to fruition. And so I just put up here some ideas of how different outcomes that could be set for any particular project. They're kind of grouped into these subcategories of business participation, opportunities for all, making sure we're engaging our entire community in what we're doing. What are the goals of the economic outcomes? Is the team really focused on long-term, full life cycle costs of the project when they make design decisions up front? What are those sustainability goals of achieving things that are really going to have a real impact, not only on our environment, but on the health and well-being of the public, or that will utilize our facilities? We particularly see that right now in the crisis we're going through is, could we do better? And could we make a bigger difference on the indoor spaces and on project management outcomes? I think having fun is actually a good outcome to have, because I believe that people that get along and have fun together can actually do better things. All the way to construction outcomes where safety is our highest priority, and that we all hold each other accountable for that safety, not only the safety of the people building our projects, but the safety of the people that will utilize our projects in the end. And if we all build the team around these goals, that we all hold each other accountable, now we can begin to build this alliance of people where we're working towards the same thing to deliver our projects on time and on budget and meet the contract requirements. So project team integration, hence the term integrated project delivery. And I know we'll have some discussions later on about what that means. The idea is that you bring the team together. And the reason you want the team together early on before you actually start design is our ability to control costs is the greatest at the beginning, because we have the greatest design freedom. And we all know from experience that the cost of changes goes up over time. The earlier a change is made, the better off you are. So why not have the discussion early to figure out what's wrong instead of waiting for somebody to find it? And that's because of the design restrictions that begin to build up on us over time that we can't go back and change. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen these. These are nothing but the modified McLeany curves that have existed for years. The idea of progressive design build, as I mentioned, is to really get that team together, completely together before you actually start design, and walk through this process, so that the idea that we can actually work as a team to get to design excellence as we go through design, so that what we build actually is something that we can that we've designed that can be built, that meets the needs of the stakeholders. So you can begin to see how our focus is connecting our stakeholders at the beginning to the end process where they will operate and maintain it. What's interesting about it with this team integration is how we can introduce the concept of virtual design and construction, because with this integrated approach now, we can begin to talk about one virtual model that we go through both design and construction. Because ultimately, anyways, that's what's got to happen with our physical building, is it's got to go through the entire process of design, construction, and then operate and maintain. So why not integrate this with the way we develop our instructions to actually build what we're going to do, and then make that part of the operations and maintenance side. And if we have the entire team together, then we don't have to keep throwing documents one party to the next to interpret, but it's the same team working on the same set of documents the whole time. So the idea, for the first time, we can actually optimize that flow of data. When I say data, I don't mean just what's the model number, what product it is, but it's also the design information data, the geospatial information, the coordination of things. All of that can actually be done seamlessly through the entire process. It isn't somebody else's fault. It's the team's obligation. The key thing, though, is that if we set up this integrated approach, we have to have a set of data requirements that we want through each one of these phases. So we have to work really hard on establishing what that's going to be and what each other's needs are as we go through the process, and make sure that those are clear from the very beginning. And then as we go through that virtual model, similar to what we've done with design review check-ins in different phases, we incrementally collect all the information we need on our projects as we go through planning to programming to design through construction all the way to the end until we actually tear down our facilities. And so, for example, when we enter an example of incremental collection of information will be related to setting a set of performance specifications up front would be the first data we might introduce, for example, on an HVAC system. But we actually don't know what it's going to look like. So then we would start to design it to meet that performance. So as that information is developed and designed, it gets added on incrementally to what we started with, the performance criteria. Ultimately, it turns into a physical product. So that physical product information then gets added on, but it stays together through the entire process. The idea with this virtual design and construction is that for the first time, we could think about having a verified model at the end instead of a bunch of as-builts that we get, or that like an afterthought of, oh, quick, we want to close out the contract. No, instead what we do is we provide this integrated tool from the integrated team that matches up what we have at the end. So what are the phases of progressive design build? And this is kind of now for the first time we're getting into the meat of what we do. What I'm going to show that what we do here in the United States is really not establish a high degree of structure or what progressive design build is, but what it can be and how it can be scalable. And so these phases of a project are fairly straightforward. There's no mystery here to them. That the very first phase we have is pre-construction services. This is critically the most important part because this is where we get that alignment. We have a programming phase where the first step is with your design build team is that we all try to get that alignment of what the scope could be with our stakeholders. We try to understand what it's going to cost. We work through that process, and we had a set of deliverables that basically form what we call the basis of design or the basis of implementation that everybody's agreed to, even allowing your designers to create that basis of design, because if they create that and we approve it, they'll know exactly what to do, and our design has a better chance of coming out because they actually know what was created. Nothing really different about the design phase that follows on right after. But this introduces for the first time for the owner to see the trade procurement process, the process of now where we have to build up the team and get pricing on things and begin to build up a GMP. So that's one thing that's kind of new to the owner, but we've known as always part of the process. We just used to do that in a bid process. That's the way we were more traditionally. Again, then we enter phase two, which is the construction services. And again, construction looks a lot like everything we've done before, except we're doing construction with an integrated development of the set of instructions or design documents that we will use. And of course, followed by an activation phase or commissioning phase, very similar to what we've done for years and years and years, followed by the closeout. So this is essentially doesn't look a lot different than design bid build, for example, or any design build project. It's just done under a single contract where the designer and builder is selected. But some of the advantage of progressive design build that we begin to do is that as we introduce these phases, we have an opportunity to set that GMP, not at the beginning at an award, but sometime between where we start the design and we start construction. And so where that GMP gets set, that can be set anywhere. My best advice for people is to set the GMP when all the parties are most comfortable. And I'll talk a little bit about things to think about where you might want to think about that GMP. But it also allows us to actually start design and get on with trade procurement on early packages, like clearing a site. You don't need to know what the top of your structure or facility is going to look like. You can get started with that and start awarding construction and actually move your construction phase forward. And of course, now you begin to see the possibility of slimming that time frame of where you have to set the GMP, which actually we'll have some more discussions about price certainty, but it narrows up the window where you might get to that price certainty that we're all looking for. But more importantly, if we have trades on board and we can actually get started, we can really start construction a whole lot earlier. We can move that construction phase forward we can still leave that GMP a little bit loose if you so choose to actually get started construction to allow the design to complete so that we can get a better, accurate price on what that GMP might be. And if we can overlap all these things, you can really see how you can really begin to shorten up that schedule. And we have in all of our projects at the airport, and we've completed about $8 billion worth. Our schedules have gotten incredibly quick now because we've actually got into this model and these different phasing. This is not a good way to start your first entry into progressive design build. It's better to start with the more linear process that I showed here when I began and get comfortable with each one of those phases, and then can slowly step back into each one of these as you learn. Most of you, I've looked at the attendance. A lot of you are builders, so this is going to be somewhat redundant, but maybe not necessarily for owners, because I know this is something we had to kind of break down and understand, is that under the design build, they buy out all the trade packages after we've awarded the contract. As we look at those trade packages to recognize that there's really two categories of work that have to be contracted for. There's the self-perform work that will actually be completed by the design builder itself. And then there's the subcontract work that will actually be done by subcontractors. Any work that is self-performed actually is just design build in itself, obviously. If it's subcontracted work, it could be just for build only, but it can also be for design build within the design build. So for example, electrical. Electrical work can actually, and many subcontractors now have design capabilities in-house, and so that is done both, they do both the design and construction. We have for years done a lot of that. For example, fire protection, precast systems, there's been a lot. So it's not a new concept. It's just expanding itself into more of these key trades that I talked about earlier that the McKinsey report suggested that we do, that we get more into the specialty trades being involved in the design. As we procure those trades on the self-perform work, you could use a negotiated price that's based off the design documents. If it's subcontracted work, same thing. It's a negotiated price based off of those design documents. And as you move towards a design build, you can also negotiate that price, but you have an opportunity maybe to select who those key trades might be based off of qualifications. So again, it's kind of like another selection process that you can do. Suggestion is that if you are going to move towards that you select those design build teams on those key trades during that programming phase before you actually start design, so that they can integrate with the prime designers at the very beginning. You also have the option for competitive bidding. You can bid out those build only type trades, for example, finished materials like flooring, those types of things, tile, glazing. And you can go out for a competitive process where you can actually have different trades competitively bid that, and that would be based off the design documents completed by the design build team. And of course, you can select the design build team off a competitive bid process if you so choose, based off a set of performance criteria. So my only point here is to show you that there's lots of different ways you can get pricing and arrive at your GMP. There's different administrative codes within the public sector that allow these different things or not allow. Of course, on the private side, there's a lot more freedom. The key thing is that all these trades that the team works together to organize all these trades together in different groups. We have called these things at SFO, and is recommended by DBIA, is that you develop these common trade package sets so we can keep them organized together. Again, this is more for a vertical type. This works just as well for a horizontal. So when we're building our air train extensions and our trade extensions or our runways, we look at things a little bit differently than this. But keep them grouped for an organization. This allows you actually then to develop these that match like a line of scheduling process you might go through, but just kind of keeping the simplification of what we're doing helps everybody go through the process, because you can only keep these down to 6 or 7 key trade package sets. It makes it kind of an easier way to keep track of all the various parts that will eventually make up your GMP. Speaking of the GMP, this is not a big mystery to most people. There are a few parts of that make up the GMP that are a little bit of a mystery, mostly to the owner side, and I had to go through that, and I'll share those. The first component of a GMP is that at the time of award of a contract, we typically award the programming fee, that validation phase of a progressive design build contract. That'll be awarded at the time, as well as the cost for the design builder to actually manage the project, the superintendent's project management, design management, those types of things. That's a lump sum cost that is awarded at the time, because you need that all the way through the programming phase, as well as design and construction. And of course, the bond cost for us in the United States has to enter that, because we have a lot of requirements that bond cost has to be in play at the very beginning. Like to see that change, but that's just where we're stuck here still in the US. The next progression of steps is to award the design services actually after you've completed the validation phase and you negotiate the design services. This would be no different than selecting an independent designer and having a negotiation, same process here. That gets added to the GMP. When you arrive at those GMP, a lot of times you'll have pre-GMP modifications that need to be included. There's the base scope of the trade packages that you have to work through, that pricing. There will be allowance that you need to include in each one of those packages, meaning this is work that will have to have a lump sum price, but isn't totally quantifiable, but they're agreed upon that it will not exceed that. So for example, structural steel, even though you're done with the design of structural steel, you might not have the penetrations fully detailed out yet because you haven't finished the HVAC portion. So you agree upon an allowance that might occur. This was the biggest part that I had a lot of trouble with as an owner, not for me personally, but for my commission and my executives to understand. And this is the idea that you've got to provide a contingency for cost and scope gaps that might occur as a result of, oops, we missed that in our buyout, or that didn't quite go as planned, and we have to make up time to meet the schedule. This is a big component that is needed for the GMP. It's also this part that really gets into, if we don't use it all, becomes that savings back to the owner at the end of a progressive GMP, but also puts a cap on how high it can be. The easiest way I was able to finally explain this to my commission, which was not an easy thing to do, is that when you used to get a low bid price on a design bid build project, that contingency was actually built in. You just never saw it. For the first time now, we have to see it. And so it's still there. It's just there and fully transparent, which is what progressive design build is all about. And so this was the first big step to deal with. And of course, the last part of the GMP is that there has to be an overhead and profit applied to all this. That is an agreed upon overhead and profit that's established at the time of award as a percentage of the direct cost to construction. So with this, all this makes up the part of the GMP. The key thing here is that the GMP is an open book process and transparent to the owner. And so there is some issues with it. So how do we progress the contract now? And there's numerous ways that you can progress the progressive design build contract. The first thing that's typical to all progressive design build is the award of that contract. And the first phase, as I showed earlier in the phasing, is the program services, where we validate the scope, align the target budgets that we would do, and then we negotiate the design services and start the design of the project. At this point, then we can begin the design. Again, you can see how this looks a lot like all our process, but remember, the design is done under the design build services. This is the point where you can actually first time establish a final GMP. This can happen anytime during those design services. The caution here is, though, is that this might give you that price certainty you need, but you're going to pay an increased final GMP. That GMP is going to be higher because built into it has to be cost for the risk uncertainty of the design and the buyout, which hasn't occurred. So in essence of what you'll do at this point to get to budget is you will lose a lot of scope never to be seen ever again, because once you push it out of the GMP, you're locked in contractually. You've created this lump sum contract essentially, but it's not a bad way to get started with progressive design build, because it gets us to that price kind of certainty that mimics what might occur in a design build contract. It might not be your final price, but it gets us closer to what we're more accustomed to. And at this point, then you go ahead and complete the construction services within that GMP. I would caution people to get into a final GMP too early, because if the GMP was wrong, That means people are going to have pricing problems down the road. And you legally, as an owner, could be in a good position to fight through that, but you're going to fight through it. And that means that it could stall your project and you might not get it done as fast as you thought you might. You could complete your design services, which is before you go into your GMP. Not a bad way to go because it'll put a greater degree of accuracy on that certainty of the final GMP. But you're going to have a longer schedule because you're moving that schedule out further. And schedule is a big cost component of projects. You're still going to have that risk for uncertainty of the buyout that might not have occurred. And you're going to have a longer schedule. So there's going to be costs associated for that. And so just as before setting that GMP too early, there will be scope reductions now, the old value engineering process that'll come into play. And so that scope will be lost too as well. But at this point, you can continue on with the construction services. And then of course, the last part, which is that overlap of all the schedule that I showed you in that last phasing, is really where at the end of design, we set these target budgets where we agree that we will design these different trade package sets through design services, and everybody works together, and we begin to buy the job out early and get confidence that, for example, the site work is completed, and we lock that down as you might call a mini GMP that fits within that target budget, but it's completely set at that point. And so we know that that portion of the work has actually got a GMP. And of course, as the construction can now begin and you begin to progress the design, you could get to a point where we're comfortable now getting a GMP on the foundations. And so on, as you work through those key trades, as they work through their design, you can negotiate those GMPs for those key trades and begin progressing that GMP, and so on as you go through the project. And you can see how we're actually building up progressively the GMP until we get the completion of the design and get all our specialty trades on board. I'll be honest with you, the term progressive actually came from progressing the GMP. We used to call this particular process design build with a progressive GMP, which is really interesting how that term progressive now has kind of followed into the progressive design build and put it in front. But this is kind of the stages of how that all happened and how we arrived back there. And in 2007, we did call this at San Francisco Airport. It was just literally called nothing but design build with the progressive GMP. So it shows you where you might set this price in different phases of the project. There's no right or wrong answer in all this. There's just different pros and cons to each one. I do want to talk here, and I'll be wrapping up shortly, is this idea of what integrated team project leadership might look like. And really, this is the idea that leadership is that all project team members will have to be a leader. Leaders have followers. Following is completely voluntary. And leadership is the ability to guide a group of people towards a common purpose. And so building these alliances of people, what we really want to do is understand that these issues lead to problems. Problems lead to disputes. And we've traditionally worked through problems and disputes where we've used things like dispute resolution boards. That's perfectly okay. But what about getting out in front of it by building this alliance of teams where everyone holds each other accountable so that we can get the issues out before they become a contractual problem, which leads to disputes. And so this idea of building this alliance is to try to do this up above, and that progressive design build allows us to do that. And so if we're allowed to have that freedom to talk about issues and resolve them before they become problems, then we can build this partnership where we talk about how we're going to plan our projects. We can have a kickoff before we set all those outcomes in advance that I talked about, that we have workshops where we actually talk about how we're doing against all those goals, that we can measure those metrics of performance of how we're doing against those, and then have a closeout workshop and see how we do so we can be better at what we do. And so we kind of coined this as calling our structured collaborative alliance building process. We actually measure at San Francisco Airport. We measure what we do on these outcomes. We coined them exceptional project outcomes. This is known as our scorecard. So we still do the traditional reporting on schedule and costs, but we also do this reporting on the scorecards. These are scorecards that go out to all of our membership on the team, both stakeholders and subcontractors. and that they score how we do. They're all color coded. And these actually come in where we actually get a scorecard. This is what helps us pull those issues out on the team so that we can address them in the workshops. This includes, are you having fun? So that we can have an open discussion and try to resolve those things. I will wrap up here really quickly with how we might organize the project team. The idea of the master builder concept is very much in play in the progressive design build model. The only problem I have with the idea of the master builder is that it's a concept that was been used thousands of years ago, where the only trade was a stonemason, and we went through this whole process. Probably not too cool in today's market with the way our projects go, because today as owners, we have tons of stakeholders. The trades have all their subcontracts, and our consultants have all their consultants as well. So maybe we look at this as more of a team concept or master team concept that has to go through the whole phase. And so how do we organize our team to go through this whole process of different phases, but it's one process? And so the thought here is that we align around and build our teams through our stakeholders, because our communications traditionally have been, and I firmly believe this is why our communication have broken down from stakeholder to trades, is because stakeholders would talk to the owner would talk to the builder and back. What we want to promote is more of this crazy kind of conversation that's integrated and allow these actual conversations to occur. But this is quite difficult because it creates a lot of communication process. And so we need to engage everybody in a unified way where these conversations can be massaged down into little groups, into the bigger groups. And so this idea that we have to integrate through the entire team, through the programming phase, through the design review process, through construction, to the activation phase where we actually test what we built to see if it meets the design and the programming requirements, and then close out is incredibly important. But how do we build this team? And so what we found works really good in progressive design build is to really build our team around the stakeholders in these different categories where we can establish owner groups of our various projects. Obviously, this is airport centric for me. If it were an education facility, it'd be a different centricity to what these groups might be. But for example, the owner of the restrooms would be custodial staff. If it's electrical, it'd be the electrical maintenance folks. It's that kind of thought. And then we subgroup these into other groups so that we can bring lots of these mini conversations through a leadership process where everybody's sharing the leadership, as I talked about earlier, where everybody's a leader. And we keep synthesizing this coordination upward. The stakeholder engagement process really involves developing all these teams with the stakeholders, the operators, the maintainers, the end users, the correct design specialists from the design team, and the build specialists at the same time, so that they help support that owner so that their vision is understood and can be carried through the design and construction process. A lead is assigned to each one of these stakeholder groups. And again, this leader is responsible for being a representative of this group, not a dictator. And then they're grouped together in these larger groups so that they can synthesize those coordination efforts behind these different leaders, and all the way up to what we call an SEP manager, which is the traditional design manager position. And so lastly, the way this fits into the whole organization of a progressive design build team is we have our owner staff. We select the design build team, and we have both the builder and designer under this contract. And I stop here real quickly that in no way does progressive design build want to engage in the hierarchy of the designer or the builder when they carry out their risk. As I started off this discussion, builders need to inherit the build risk once the contract terms have been established, but we should stay out of their business. Same with the designer. If we've communicated the vision, other than when we review the work, stay out of how they do that business. But whenever we're going to co-create the programming phase of the project or resolve issues, we need to revert back to those stakeholder teams that are made up of the team on the right-hand side. They make up the team on the left side. In essence, what we've done here is created a matrix organization for programming, development, and issue resolution, that area where we align expectations before we go into the contract stage. And so the idea is that the team on the right actually has to wear two hats. Sometimes we have to filter out and be on the left-hand side. Once we align expectations and we put those into a form of commercial terms, then we move straight back to the contract and stay out of that conversation. And so we're allowing a matrix organization to fit into a legal process that we go through. Hence, what this allows us to is it doesn't change how we design and build, not changing that but it allows this relationship that can occur, that what we're showing here on the left-hand side, that we have a better chance to connect the stakeholders with the trades and really enhance that productivity so that we can do more with the dollars we have for a project. So with that, I believe we'll have questions after Bruce, but I just want to thank you all for spending a little bit of time with me. I know I shed a lot of information out there. And again, I cannot thank you enough for giving me this opportunity to present to you. I'm extremely honored to be here and kind of give you some insight of where DBIA sits, as well as the thought process that I've been through, and know that we've got a long ways to go to talk about this. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Paul.
Jeff, thank you so much. I can't tell you how interested I was in your presentation, and I can just tell how passionate you are, because I think you got through that entire presentation without even taking a breath. So I remarked on how slick that delivery was. So thank you for that. To everyone who's online and listening, yes, there's going to be a combined session with Jeff and Bruce, because we've got our Bruce is our second speaker for today, because we've got a few questions from the floor that I think is going to be helpful if we address them in a comparative way. I will take advantage, though, of my position as moderator. I'm going to throw one question at you, Jeff, before we take a break. We're gonna break at 12:30 Mountain Time, so that's going to be 2:30 Eastern. Before we and 11:30 Pacific, if I covered everyone's time zones properly. We're going to take a 5-minute break, reload, and then come back for session number 2. But while I've got you, I'm going to ask you this question, and maybe this will spur some thought as well for the afternoon Q&A. One of the slides that I was very interested in was the slide called Project Outcome Beyond the Contract. And that combined with the different colored scorecards that you have to keep track of data on projects. So with the time that you have, does progressive design build really deliver more successful projects where owners, contractors, all stakeholders are truly happy with the outcome? Because that was one of the questions. Are you having fun? And are you achieving project outcomes that are beyond the 4 corners of the contract? I'll leave you with that to address that point before we go to break.
It's a really good question. Will it deliver? No, it won't. It's not a guarantee at all. In fact, I'll be fully honest. Progressive design build, if you can't develop a team that trusts each other, and you don't have the right team, and you're not all working towards those common goals, it will be, interestingly enough, it will not meet the contract requirements. And it can be your worst nightmare. What we're trying to do here is understand that if you have a team you've got the right team to begin with, and that team is trusting each other and having fun, that's your greatest chance of exceeding the contract requirements. Not just meeting them, but beating them. How to do it faster, how to do it better, how to get more. It's your only chance. And so the idea here is to invoke that type of relationship before you have to kick the contract requirements in. If we do have to invoke the contract, which can happen, you might have to ask yourself, why did that happen? And it's probably because we didn't check on the health of the relationship of the team. And so the only purpose of showing that is to check in on that health and try to fix those things before you have to invoke the contract. Is it a guarantee? No. Does it have to be worked out really hard? Yep. And there's a lot of tough things sometimes you have to do along that way. I've had to change out people, both on the contractor side, design side, and my own staff, as I mentioned before. It takes a lot of work. And I've recognized that many times myself can be part of the problem as an owner. We are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And so what's really nice is when you can have somebody, a design builder, trust you enough to say, hey, Jeff, you're screwing up. Oops. And it's easy to fix, right? Because we're having an honest discussion that we can actually do that and go, oh, thank you, you're right. But we have to remain open. And so that scorecard is nothing but a check on the health of the team and how we're doing. Because when it says, are we on schedule? It doesn't check any of the reports. It's more just the intuition, what people think. That's all it is. So, good help.
So developing the team, developing the relationship, and focusing on that part of it at the front end will hopefully drive the contract as opposed to doing it the other way around, right?
Correct. That's the idea. It's not a guarantee. It is absolutely not a guarantee.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to address you first. I think we've come just about to the break. So what I'm going to ask everyone to do is to hit the pause button, reload, stretch your legs or virtually or in real life, and we'll reconvene in we have it precisely in about 7 minutes at 12:35 Mountain, 11:35 Pacific, and 2:35 Eastern. All right. And we'll have Jeff back as part of the combined Q&A at the end of session 2 with our next speaker. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Julia.